Alright, we are coming up on 8 o'clock, so let's go ahead and settle in and get ready for tonight's reading, shall we? Welcome back, everyone. This is our first and probably only night, this is a pretty quick one, of reading A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift. This is a particularly biting satire written in the 1700s. There's some context, but it'll mostly come out in the reading. I remember reading this when I was in school and thinking, wow, it was something else. It doesn't really pull punches. It's scathing and critical of the current approach to a particular problem, and it does not even try to pull its punches. So we'll go ahead and get into it tonight and try our best not to be political, but if it happens, it happens. We're probably going to be a short night tonight. I had a very long day driving back and forth to the office. It's a long commute. That is interesting. I guess just to pull out the Swifties or something, or... I tried to find an appropriate hashtag for this one to try and loop it into the appropriate community, because that seemed to work really well for the Lovecraft the other night. But drew a blank. There was not a lick of mention about this on over on Bluesky, aside from one account who has never posted, who is just Jonathan Swift. So we'll see if we can break some ground here. So, as I was saying, we've got a short reading tonight. This is just a few pages, so we'll probably be done in round about an hour. This is kind of highbrow, so it might be a little dense. So we'll take it nice and slow and work our way through it and really savor the prose, shall we say. And so let's go ahead and just kick things off. We've got A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift for preventing the children of poor people in Ireland from being a burden on their parents or country, and for making them beneficial to the public. By Dr. Jonathan Swift, written in 1729. It is a melancholy object to those who walk through this great town or travel in the country when they see the streets, the roads, and cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3, 4, or 6 children, all in rags and importuning every passenger for an alms. These mothers, instead of being able to work for their honest livelihood, are forced to employ all their time in strolling to beg sustenance for their helpless infants who, as they grow up, either turn thieves for want of work, or leave their dear native country to fight for the Pretender in Spain, or sell themselves to the Barbados. I think it is agreed by all parties that this prodigious number of children in the arms, or on the backs, or at the heels of their mothers, and frequently of their fathers, is in the present deplorable state of the kingdom a very great additional grievance, and therefore whoever could find out a fair, cheap, and easy method of making these children sound and useful members of the Commonwealth should deserve so well of the public as to have his statue set up for a preserver of the nation. But my intention is very far from being confined to provide only for the children of professed beggars. It is of a much greater extent, and shall take in the whole number of infants at a certain age, who are born of parents in effect as little able to support them, as those who demand our charity in the streets. As to my own part, having turned my thoughts for many years upon this important subject, and maturely weighed the several schemes of our projectors, I have always found them grossly mistaken in their computation. It is true, a child just dropped from its dam may be supported by her milk for a solar year with little other nourishment, at most not above the value of 2 shillings, which the mother may certainly get, or the value in scraps, by her lawful occupation of begging. And it is exactly at 1 year old that I propose to provide for them in such a manner as, instead of being a charge upon their parents, or the parish, or wanting food and raiment for the rest of their lives, they shall, on the contrary, contribute to the feeding, and partly to the clothing, of many thousands. There is likewise another great advantage in my scheme, that it will prevent those voluntary abortions, and that horrid practice of women murdering their bastard children, alas! too frequent among us, sacrificing the poor innocent babes, I doubt, more to avoid the expense than the shame, which would move tears and pity in the most savage and inhuman breast. The number of souls in this kingdom being usually reckoned 1.5 million, of these I calculate there may be about 200,000 couple whose wives are breeders, from which number I subtract 30,000 couple who are able to maintain their own children, although I apprehend there cannot be so many under the present distress of the kingdom. But this being granted, there will remain 170,000 breeders. I again subtract 50,000 for those women who miscarry, or whose children die by accident or disease within the year. There only remain 120,000 children of poor parents annually born. The question, therefore, is how this number shall be reared and provided for, which, as I have already said, under the present situation of affairs is utterly impossible by all the methods hitherto proposed, for we can neither employ them in handicraft or agriculture, they neither build houses, in the country, nor cultivate land. They can very seldom pick up a livelihood by stealing till they arrive at 6 years old, except where they are of towardly parts, although I confess they learn the rudiments much earlier, during which time they can however be properly looked upon only as probationers, as I have been informed by a principal gentleman in the country of Cavan, who protested to me that he never knew above 1 or 2 instances under the age of 6, even in a part of the kingdom so renowned for the quickest proficiency in that art. I am assured by our merchants that a boy or girl before 12 years old is no saleable commodity. Even when they come to this age, they will not yield above 3 pounds, or 3 pounds and half a crown at most on the exchange, which cannot turn to account either to the parents or kingdom, the charge of nutrients and rags having been at least 4 times that value. I shall now, therefore, humbly propose my own thoughts, which I hope will not be liable to the least objection. Oh, you are just in time indeed. I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young, healthy child, well nursed, is, at a year old, a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled, and I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or ragoût. I do, therefore, humbly offer it to public consideration that of the 120,000 children already computed, 20,000 may be reserved for breed, whereof only 1/4 part to be males, which is more than we allow to sheep, black cattle, or swine. And my reason is that these children are seldom the fruits of marriage, a circumstance not much regarded by our savages. Therefore, 1 male will be sufficient to serve 4 females, that the remaining 100,000 may, at a year old, be offered in sale to the persons of quality and fortune through the kingdom, always advising the mother to let them suck plentifully in the last month, so as to render them plump and fat for a good table. A child will make 2 dishes at an entertainment for friends, and when the family dines alone, the fore or hind quarter will make a reasonable dish, and seasoned with a little pepper or salt will be very good boiled on the fourth day, especially in winter. I have reckoned upon a medium, that a child just born will weigh 12 pounds, and in a solar year, if tolerably nursed, increaseth to 28 pounds. I grant this food will be somewhat dear, and therefore very proper for landlords, who, as they have already devoured most of the parents, seem to have the best title to the children. Infant's flesh will be in season throughout the year, but more plentiful in March, and a little before and after. For we are told by a grave author, an eminent French physician, that fish being a prolific diet, there are more children born in Roman Catholic countries about 9 months after Lent than at any other season. Therefore, reckoning a year after Lent, the markets will be more glutted than usual, because the number of popish infants is at least 3 to 1 in this kingdom, and therefore it will have one other collateral advantage, by lessening the number of papists among us. I have already computed the charge of nursing a beggar's child, in which list I reckon all cottagers, laborers, and 4/5 of the farmers, to be about 2 shillings per annum, rags included, and I believe no gentleman would repine to give 10 shillings for the carcass of a good fat child, which, as I have said, will make 4 dishes of excellent nutritive meat, when he hath only some particular friend or his own family to dine with him. Thus the squire will learn to be a good landlord, and grow popular among his tenants. The mother will have 8 shillings neat profit, and be fit for work till she produces another child. Those who are more thrifty, as I must confess the times require, may flay the carcass, the skin of which, artificially dressed, will make admirable gloves for ladies, and summer boots for fine gentlemen. As to our city of Dublin, shambles may be appointed for this purpose, in the most convenient parts of it, and butchers, we may be assured, will not be wanting, although I rather recommend buying the children alive, and dressing them hot from the knife, as we do roasting pigs. A very worthy person, a true lover of his country, and whose virtues I highly esteem, was lately pleased in discoursing on this manner, to offer a refinement upon my scheme. He said that many gentlemen of this kingdom, having of late destroyed their deer, he conceives that the want of venison might be well supplied by the bodies of young lads and maidens, not exceeding 14 years of age, nor under 12, so great a number of both sexes in every country being now ready to starve for want of work and service, and these to be disposed of by their parents, if alive, or otherwise by their nearest relations, but with due deference to so excellent a friend, and so deserving a patriot, I cannot be altogether in his sentiments. For as to the males, my American acquaintance assured me from frequent experience that their flesh was generally tough and lean, like that of our schoolboys, by continual exercise, and their taste disagreeable, and to fatten them would not answer the charge. Then, as to the females, it would, I think, with humble submission, be a loss to the public, because they soon would become breeders themselves, and besides, it is not improbable that some scrupulous people might be apt to censure such a practice, although indeed very unjustly, as a little bordering upon cruelty, which, I confess, hath always been with me the strongest objection against any project, how well soever intended. But in order to justify my friend, he confessed that this expedient was put into his head by the famous Salmanazar, a native of the island of Formosa, who came here from thence to London above 20 years ago, and in conversation told my friend that in his country, when any young person happened to be put to death, the executioner sold the carcass to persons of quality as a prime dainty, and that, in his time, the body of a plump girl of 15 who was crucified for an attempt to poison the emperor was sold to his Imperial Majesty's Prime Minister of State, and other great mandarins of the court in joints from the gibbet at 400 crowns. Neither indeed can I deny that if the same use were made of several plump young girls in this town, who, without one single groat to their fortunes, cannot stir abroad without a chair, and appear at a playhouse and assemblies in foreign fineries which they never will pay for, the kingdom would not be the worst. Some persons of a desponding spirit are in great concern about that vast number of poor people who are aged, diseased, or maimed, and I have been desired to employ my thoughts what course may be taken to ease the nation of so grievous an encumbrance. But I am not in the least pain upon that matter, because it is very well known that they are every day dying and rotting by cold and famine and filth and vermin as fast as can be reasonably expected. And as to the young laborers, they are now in almost as hopeful a condition. They cannot get work, and consequently pine away from want of nourishment, to a degree that if at any time they are accidentally hired to common labor, they have not strength to perform it, and thus the country and themselves are happily delivered from the evils to come. I have too long digressed, and therefore shall return to my subject. I think the advantages by the proposal which I have made are obvious and many, as well as of the highest importance. For first, as I have already observed, it would greatly lessen the number of papists, with whom we are yearly overrun, being the principal breeders of the nation, as well as our most dangerous enemies, and who stay at home on purpose with a design to deliver the kingdom to the Pretender, hoping to take their advantage by the absence of so many good Protestants, who have chosen rather to leave their country than stay at home and pay tithes against their conscience to an episcopal curate. Secondly, the poorer tenants will have something valuable of their own, which by law may be made liable to a distress, and help to pay their landlord's rent, their corn and cattle being already seized, and money a thing unknown. Thirdly, whereas the maintenance of 100,000 children from 2 years old and upwards cannot be computed at less than 10 shillings apiece per annum, the nation's stock will be thereby increased 50,000 pounds per annum, besides the profit of a new dish introduced to the tables of all gentlemen of fortune in the kingdom, who have any refinement in taste. And yes, Zoe, hello. And the money will circulate among ourselves, the goods being entirely of our own growth and manufacture. Fourthly, the constant breeders, besides the gain of 8 shillings sterling per annum by the sale of their children, will be rid of the charge of maintaining them after the first year. Fifthly, this food would likewise bring great custom to taverns, where the vintners will certainly be so prudent as to procure the best receipts for dressing it to perfection, and consequently have their houses frequented by all the fine gentlemen, who justly value themselves upon their knowledge in good eating, and a skillful cook, who understands how to oblige his guests, will contrive to make it as expensive as they please. Sixthly, this would be a great inducement to marriage, which all wise nations have either encouraged by rewards or enforced by laws and penalties, would increase the care and tenderness of mothers towards their children, when they were sure of a settlement for life to the poor babes, provided in some sort by the public, to their annual profit instead of expense. We should soon see an honest emulation among the married women, which of them could bring the fattest child to the market. Men would become as fond of their wives during the time of their pregnancy as they are now of their mares in foal, their cows in calf, or sows when they are ready to farrow, nor offer to beat or kick them, as is too frequent a practice, for fear of a miscarriage. Many other advantages might be enumerated. For instance, the addition of some 1,000 carcasses in our exploration of barreled beef, the propagation of swine's flesh, and the improvement in the art of making good bacon, too much wanted among us by the great destruction of pigs, too frequent at our tables, which are no way comparable in taste or magnificence to a well-grown, fat yearling child, which roasted whole will make a considerable figure at a Lord Mayor's feast, or at any other public entertainment, But this, and many others I omit, being studious of brevity. Supposing that 1,000 families in this city would be constant customers for infant flesh, besides others who might have it at merry meetings, particularly at weddings and christenings, I compute that Dublin would take off annually about 20,000 carcasses, and the rest of the kingdom, where probably they will be sold somewhat cheaper, the remaining 80,000. I can think of no one objection that will possibly be raised against this proposal, unless it should be urged that the number of people will be thereby much lessened in the kingdom. This I freely own, and was indeed one principal design in offering it to the world. I desire the reader will observe that I calculate by remedy for this one individual kingdom of Ireland, and for no other that ever was, is, or, I think, can ever be upon earth. Therefore, let no man talk to me of other expedients, of taxing our absentees at 5 shillings a pound, of using neither clothes nor household furniture except what is of our own growth and manufacture, of utterly rejecting the materials and instruments that promote foreign luxury, of curing the expensiveness of pride, vanity, idleness, and gaming in our women, of introducing a vein of parsimony, prudence, and temperance, of learning to love our country, wherein we differ even from Laplanders, in the inhabitants of Tapanambu, of quitting our animosities and factions, nor acting any longer like the Jews, who were murdering one another at the very moment their city was taken, of being a little cautious, not to sell our country and consciences for nothing, of teaching landlords to have at least 1 degree of mercy toward their tenants. Lastly, of putting a spirit of honesty, industry, and skill into our shopkeepers, who, if a resolution could now be taken to buy only our native goods, would immediately unite to cheat and exact upon us in the price, the measure, and the goodness, nor could ever yet be brought to make one fair proposal of just dealing, though often and earnestly invited to it. Therefore, I repeat, let no man talk to me of these and the like expedients till he hath at least some glimpse of hope, that there will ever be some hearty and sincere attempt to put them into practice. But as to myself, having been wearied out for many years with offering vain, idle, visionary thoughts, and at length utterly despairing of success, I fortunately fell upon this proposal, which, as it is wholly new, so it hath something solid and real, of no expense and little trouble, full in our own power, and whereby we can incur no danger in disobliging England. For this kind of commodity will not bear exportation, and flesh being of too tender a consistence to admit a long continuance in salt, although perhaps I could name a country which would be glad to eat up our whole nation without it. After all, I am not so violently bent upon my own opinion as to reject any offer proposed by wise men which shall be found equally innocent, cheap, easy, and effectual. But before something of that kind shall be advanced in contradiction to my scheme and offering a better, I desire the author or authors, will be pleased maturely to consider 2 points. First, as things now stand, how they will be able to find food and raiment for 100,000 useless mouths and backs. And secondly, there being a round million of creatures in humane figure throughout this kingdom, whose sole subsistence put into a common stock would leave them in debt 2,000,000 of pounds sterling. Adding those who are beggars by profession to the bulk of farmers, cottagers, and laborers with their wives and children who are beggars in effect, I desire those politicians who dislike my overture, and may perhaps be so bold to attempt an answer, that they will first ask the parents of these mortals whether they would not at this day think it a great happiness to have been sold for food at a year old, in the manner I prescribe, and thereby have avoided such a perpetual scene of misfortunes as they have since gone through. by the oppression of landlords, the impossibility of paying rent without money or trade, the want of common sustenance, with neither house nor clothes to cover them from their inclemencies of the weather, and the most inevitable prospect of entailing the like or greater miseries upon their breed forever. I profess in the sincerity of my heart that I have not the least personal interest in endeavoring to promote this necessary work, having no other motive than the public good of my country, by advancing our trade, providing for infants, relieving the poor, and giving some pleasure to the rich. I have no children by which I can propose to get a single penny, the youngest being 9 years old and my wife past childbearing. And that is the end of a modest proposal. So that was incredibly scathing. So in context, in the early 1700s, there was an epidemic of poverty among the Irish. And the United Kingdom, England, was very heavy in its colonialist ambitions at this point. And so they had very little to no public spending. They didn't do almost any sort of care for the lower citizenry. And so Jonathan Swift had been, throughout his career, trying to be a humanitarian. And published this in a fit of pique, shall we say. And this is every bit as much as the Onion wishes it could be. There is not a single serious thread throughout this, but goodness gracious, is it put together well. So it's, as I mentioned in the post, it is shocking and satirical, and I think it lives up to that sort of description. And that did not take us very long at all. Okay, we're going to need a little bit more than this. I seem to remember this being longer when I read it in school, but I guess we just talked about it longer. And at that point, I do distinctly remember we were actually split up. I think it was my senior English class, and we were split up into groups, and half of us had to defend it, and half of us had to gainsay it. And man, that was brought on some interesting conversations. And there are some people that I swear to all that is holy were deadly serious. It could just be the nature of it taking so much longer to read when you're being guided through it. Just sitting down and powering through it like this in something like 20 minutes. It's a luxury. We're not dissecting it. Ooh, awkward choice of words. In any way, yeah. So let's see. There's some other short stories that might be interesting to read. Oh, we could do about, yeah, it's in the same timetable. There's Selected Sermons of Jonathan Edwards, a very famous firebrand preacher. That could be fun to get through one of them. I remember reading one and it was something else. Although that's not really on brand. Yeah, it really did not pull any punches at all. It was just straight out in the middle of it. No, like it just boom, there it is. And yeah, there's a certain timelessness to it as well, because there always have been and always will be those that are unable to care for themselves and etc. And it's always a societal problem of how to arrange for their care and betterment while directing that effort toward the betterment of the community. And there's always those that are pushing for just abandonment, and then others that are pushing for robust safety nets, and there's all sorts of arguments. I haven't heard this one come up in modern times. Maybe it's time again. Maybe it'll come up, and we'll see. We'll see if the next budget discussions start edging toward this with some creative culinary exploitation. Please no. But yes, so there are many things that never change. There's people without conscience who will always be looking to exploit those who they can. And there are those that maybe in a dearth of feasibility and sense want to push so much harder than may be feasible to help others. So there's all sorts of options. And yes, I am trying very, very hard to tiptoe around the issue. This is a literature channel. We read books. Oh man. Let's see if there's any good famous short stories. We could probably get a second one in. Yep, I'm doing my very best. I have a particular lean, and I try not to have it show in the channel. What is this one? Arthur Conan Doyle. That's probably long. If I'd known this was so short, I would have given it a little bit more. Oh yeah, that's way too long. If I'd known this was so short, I would have prepared a second short story. We could go to Lovecraft, but I kind of wanted to save those for dedicated nights. Oh, is there a Vonnegut short story in the public word? How long is this? I need to see. I would love to be able to read Vonnegut here. Yeah, it's a problem that we don't often come across. Usually it's more a question of I run over or we push close to the hour mark and I feel okay. But this was far shorter than I expected. But this actually might be one. This is by Kurt Vonnegut, but was published in such that it did not have copyright renewed. So it is in the public domain, at least in the US. So, let's give it a try, shall we? This is 2BR02B by Kurt Vonnegut. Got a problem? Just pick up the phone. It solved them all, and all the same way. 2BR02B by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Everything was perfectly swell. There were no prisons, no slums, no insane asylums, no cripples, no poverty, no wars. All diseases were conquered, so was old age. Death, barring accidents, was an adventure for volunteers. The population of the United States was stabilized at 40 million souls. One bright morning in the Chicago Lying-In Hospital, a man named Edward K. Whaling Jr. waited for his wife to give birth. He was the only man waiting. Not many people were born a day anymore. Whaling was 56, a mere stripling in a population whose average age was 129. X-rays had revealed that his wife was going to have triplets. The children would be his first. Young Whaling was hunched in his chair, his head in his hand. He was so rumpled, so still and colorless as to be virtually invisible. His camouflage was perfect, since the waiting room had a disorderly and demoralized air, too. Chairs and ashtrays had been moved away from the walls. The floor was paved with spattered drop cloths. The room was being redecorated. It was being redecorated as a memorial to a man who had volunteered to die. A sardonic old man, about 200 years old, sat on a stepladder, painting a mural he did not like. Back in the days when people aged visibly, his age would have been guessed at 35 or so. Aging had touched him that much before the cure for aging was found. The mural he was working on depicted a very neat garden. Yeah. Men and women in white, doctors and nurses, turned to the soil, planted seedlings, sprayed bugs, spread fertilizer. Men and women in purple uniforms pulled up weeds, cut down plants that were old and sickly, raked leaves, carried refuse to trash burners. Never, 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 not even in medieval Holland nor old Japan, had a garden been more formal, been better tended. Every plant had all the loam, light, water, air, and nourishment it could use. A hospital orderly came down the corridor, singing under his breath a popular song. If you don't like my kisses, honey, here's what I will do. I'll go see a girl in purple, kiss this sad world toodle-doo. If you won't want my lovin', why should I take up all this space? I'll get off this old planet, let some sweet baby have my place. The orderly looked in at the mural and the muralist. Looks so real, he said. I can practically imagine I'm standing in the middle of it. What makes you think you're not in it? Said the painter. He gave a satiric smile. It's called the Happy Garden of Life, you know. That's good of Dr. Hitz, said the orderly. He was referring to one of the male figures in white, whose head was a portrait of Dr. Benjamin Hitz, the hospital's chief obstetrician. Hitz was a blindingly handsome man. A lot of faces still to fill in, said the orderly. He meant that the faces of many of the figures in the mural were still blank. All blanks were to be filled with portraits of important people, on either the hospital staff or from the Chicago office of the Federal Bureau of Termination. Must be nice to be able to make pictures that look like something, said the orderly. The painter's face curdled with scorn. You think I'm proud of this daub? He said. You think this is my idea of what life really looks like? What's your idea of what life looks like? Said the orderly. The painter gestured at a foul drop cloth. There's a good picture of it, he said. Frame that. You'll have a picture a damn sight more honest than this one. You're a gloomy old duck, aren't you? Said the orderly. Is that a crime? Said the painter. The orderly shrugged. If you don't like it here, Grandpa, he said, and he finished the thought with the trick telephone number that people who didn't want to live anymore were supposed to call. The 0 in the telephone number he pronounced not. The number was to be or not to be. It was the telephone number of an institution whose fanciful sobriquets included Automat, Birdland, Cannery, Catbox, De-Louser, Easy Go, Goodbye Mother, Happy Hooligan, Kiss Me Quick, Lucky Pierre, Sheep Dip, Warring Blender, Weep No More, and Why Worry? To be or not to be was the telephone number of the municipal gas chambers of the Federal Bureau of Termination. The painter thumbed his nose at the orderly. When I decide it's time to go, he said, it won't be at the Sheep Dip. Do it yourselfer, huh? Said the orderly. Messy business, Grandpa. Why don't you have a little consideration for the people who have to clean up after you? The painter expressed with an obscenity his lack of concerns for the tribulations of his survivors. The world could do with a good deal more mess if you ask me, he said. The orderly laughed and moved on. Wayland, the waiting father, mumbled something without raising his head, and then he fell silent again. A coarse, formidable woman strode into the waiting room on spike heels. Her shoes, stockings, trench coat, bag, and overseas cap were all purple. The purple the painter had called the color of grapes on Judgment Day. The medallion on her purple musette bag was the seal of the Service Division of the Federal Bureau of Termination, an eagle perched on a turnstile. The woman had a lot of facial hair, an unmistakable mustache, in fact. A curious thing about gas chamber hostesses was that no matter how lovely and feminine they were when recruited, they all sprouted mustaches within 5 years or so. "Is this where I'm supposed to come?" she said to the painter. "A lot would depend on what your business was," he said. "You aren't about to have a baby, are you?" "They told me I was supposed to pose for some picture," she said. "My name's Leora Duncan." She waited. "And you dunk people?" he said. "What?" she said. "Skip it," he said. "That sure is a beautiful picture," she said. "Looks just like heaven or something." "Or something," said the painter. He took a list of names from his smock pocket. "Duncan, Duncan, Duncan," he said, scanning the list. "Yes, here you are. You're entitled to be immortalized. See any faceless body here you'd like me to stick your head on? We've got a few choice ones left." She studied the mural bleakly. "Gee," she said, "they're all the same to me. I don't know anything about art." "A body's a body, eh?" he said. "All righty. As a master of fine art, I recommend this body here." He indicated a faceless figure of a woman who was carrying dried stalks to a trash burner. "Well," said Leora Duncan, "that's more the disposal people, isn't it? I mean, I'm in service. I don't do any disposing." The painter clapped his hands in mock delight. "You say you don't know anything about art, and then you prove in the next breath that you know more about it than I do. Of course, the sheaf carrier is wrong for a hostess. A snipper, a pruner, that's more your line." He pointed to a figure in purple who was sawing a dead branch from an apple tree. "How about her? You like her at all?" "Gosh," she said, as she blushed and became humble. That puts me right next to Dr. Hitz." "That upsets you," he said. "Good gravy, no," she said. It's just such an honor." "Ah, you admire him, eh?" he said. "Who doesn't admire him?" she said, worshipping the portrait of Hitz. It was the portrait of a tanned, white-haired, omnipotent Zeus, 240 years old. "Who doesn't admire him?" she said again. "He was responsible for setting up the very first gas chamber in Chicago." "Nothing would please me more," said the painter, "than to put you next to him for all time, sawing off a limb. That strikes you as appropriate?" "That is kind of like what I do," she said. She was demure about what she said. What she did. What she did was make people comfortable while she killed them. And while Leora Duncan was posing for her portrait, into the waiting room bounded Dr. Hitz himself. He was 7 feet tall, and he boomed with importance, accomplishments, and the joy of living. "Well, Miss Duncan," he said, and he made a joke. "What are you doing here?" he said. "This isn't where people leave. This is where they come in." "We're going to be in the same picture together," she said shyly. "Good," said Dr. Hitz heartily. "And say, isn't that some picture?" "I sure am honored to be in it with you," she said. "Let me tell you," he said, "I'm honored to be in it with you. Without women like you, this wonderful world we've got wouldn't be possible." He saluted her and moved toward the door that led to the delivery rooms. "Guess what was just bored," he said. "I can't," she said. "Triplets," he said. "Triplets," she said. She was exclaiming over the legal implications of triplets. The law said that no newborn child could survive unless the parents of the child could find someone who would volunteer to die. Triplets, if they were all to live, called for 3 volunteers. Do the parents have 3 volunteers? Said Leora Duncan. Last I heard, said Dr. Hitz, they had 1, and were trying to scrape another 2 up. I don't think they made it, she said. Nobody made 3 appointments with us. Nothing but singles going through today, unless somebody called in after I left. What's the name? Whaling, said the waiting father, sitting up, red-eyed and frowsy. Edward K. Whaling, Jr. is the name of the happy father-to-be. He raised his right hand, looked at a spot on the wall, gave a hoarsely wretched chuckle. Present, he said. Oh, Mr. Whaling, said Dr. Hitz. I didn't see you. The Invisible Man, said Whaling. They just phoned me that your triplets have been born, said Dr. Hitz. They're all fine, and so is the mother. I'm on my way in to see them now. Hooray, said Whaling emptily. You don't sound very happy, said Dr. Hitz. What man in my shoes wouldn't be happy, said Whaling. He gestured with his hands to symbolize carefree simplicity. All I have to do is pick out which one of the triplets is going to live, then deliver my maternal grandfather to the happy hooligan, and come back here with a receipt. Dr. Hitz became rather severe with Whaling, towered over him. You don't believe in population control, Mr. Whaling, he said. I think it's perfectly keen, said Whaling tautly. Would you like to go back to the good old days when the population of the Earth was 20 billion, about to become 40 billion, then 80 billion, then 160 billion? Did you know what a druplet is, Mr. Whaling? No, said Mr. Whaling sulkily. A druplet, Mr. Whaling, is one of the little knobs, one of the little pulpy grains of a blackberry, said Dr. Hitz. Without population control, human beings would now be packed on this surface of this old planet like druplets on a blackberry. Think of it! Whaling continued to stare at the same spot on the wall. In the year 2000, said Dr. Hitz, before scientists stepped in and laid down the law, there wasn't even enough drinking water to go around, and nothing to eat but seaweed. And still, people insisted on their right to reproduce like jackrabbits, and their right, if possible, to live forever. I want those kids, said Whaling quietly. I want all 3 of them. Of course you do, said Dr. Hitz. That's only human. I don't want my grandfather to die either, said Whaling. Nobody's really happy about taking a close relative to the cat box, said Dr. Hitz gently, sympathetically. I wish people wouldn't call it that, said Leora Duncan. What? Said Dr. Hitz. I wish people wouldn't call it the cat box and things like that, she said. It gives people the wrong impression. You're absolutely right, said Dr. Hitz. Forgive me, he corrected himself. Gave the municipal gas chambers their official title, a title no one ever used in conversation. I should have said Ethical Suicide Studios, he said. That sounds so much better, said Leora Duncan. This child of yours, whichever one you decide to keep, Mr. Whaling, said Dr. Hitz, he or she is going to live on a happy, roomy, clean, rich planet, thanks to population control. In a garden like that mural there, he shook his head, 2 centuries ago, when I was a young man. It was a hell that nobody thought could last another 20 years. Now, centuries of peace and plenty stretch before us as far as the imagination cares to travel. He smiled luminously. The smile faded as he saw that Whaling had just drawn a revolver. Whaling shot Dr. Hitz in the head. "There's room for one, a great big one," he said. And then he shot Leora Duncan. "It's only death," he said to her as she fell. "There, room for two." Then he shot himself, making room for all three of his children. Nobody came running. Nobody seemingly heard the shots. The painter sat on top of his stepladder, looking down reflectively on the sorry scene. The painter pondered the mournful puzzle of life, demanding to be born, and once born, demanding to be fruitful, to multiply and to live as long as possible, to do all that on a very small planet that would have to last forever. All the answers that the painter could think of were grim, even grimmer surely than a cat box, a happy hooligan, and easy go. He thought of war, he thought of plague, he thought of starvation. He knew that he would never paint again. He let his paintbrush fall to the drop claws below, and then he decided he had had about enough of life in the happy garden of life too, and he came slowly down from the ladder. He took Whaling's pistol, really intending to shoot himself, but he didn't have the nerve. And then he saw the telephone booth in the corner of the room. He went to it, dialed the well-remembered number, to be or not to be. "Federal Bureau of Termination," said the very warm voice of a hostess. "How soon could I get an appointment?" he asked, speaking very carefully. "We could probably fit you in late this afternoon, sir," she said. "It might even be earlier if we get a cancellation." "All right," said the painter. "Fit me in, if you please." And he gave her his name, spelling it out. "Thank you, sir," said the hostess. "Your city thanks you. Your country thanks you. Your planet thanks you. But the deepest thanks of all is from future generations." The end. Okay, so I randomly picked that one out when I saw that it was Vonnegut, but man, it is actually pretty close to on theme with A Modest Proposal. So, I'm pretty satisfied with that one. Kind of thinking about the opposite end of things, but it's two peas in a pod, shall we say. So, I was very surprised to see some Vonnegut over on Gutenberg. That was a wonderful surprise. And Vonnegut's always a pleasure to read. It's a pity we won't be able to read much of him on the channel. But that was an interesting take on things, and just as satirical, honestly, as A Modest Proposal. With it being... Yeah, I think I enjoyed Vonnegut even as I was younger, but again, it fell into the trap of being forced to read so much of his stuff. We read Cat's Cradle, we read Slaughterhouse-Five in school, and while it was fine to read them, it didn't quite have the same impact. So much of his stuff depends on you having a bit of lived experience to really appreciate the layers of irony he slathers onto everything. Because he's kind of biting by himself. But I do need to give him another read, a few more books. Because, I mean, his library is so great. There's so many just absolute hits. Actually, man, I remember, because I think he passed while I was in school. We made a very big deal out of it. Understandably so, because it was, I mean, that's the end of a legend there. He was, I remember he made a big deal about always smoking unfiltered cigarettes, and somehow lasted as long as he did. Oh, yeah, that's understandable. I was pretty lucky in that I had actually a slew of very good English teachers. I really lucked out, actually. My freshman and junior were the same teacher, and he was splendid. Exposed us to a lot of great stuff. I remember our junior year was almost all American lit. The freshman year we did the Odyssey and some Shakespeare and things like that, but we took the time to really talk about it and dissect it and get a feel for the thought processes that were involved in not only analyzing literature but enjoying it. It wasn't just the empty, the curtains were blue, so blah blah blah. There was a lot more to it. I mean, inevitably some students took that route because, I mean, you gotta fill papers, I guess, or you gotta sound like you're thoughtful, but oh yeah, wow. I think my graduating class is about 600 people. So, there's only so much you can do there, right? I'm sure the funding is tight, and just the talent pool in that is kind of limited by just the people that want to come out and work and teach in that sort of environment. Alright guys, well, I think we are going to wrap up here. We did stretch it to an hour. We got 2 short stories in. We got A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift, as was the title of the stream, and we got To Be or Not to Be from Kurt Vonnegut. That was a very pleasant surprise. And they were both very well on theme with each other. Oh wow, that is crazy. That is all sorts of hand-me-downs. To be fair, curriculums don't often change that much, but usually you expect slightly newer editions. At least every generation or so, right? But, alright, so let's go ahead and call it a wrap here tonight. It is early, but I think it's the curse of going with the short stories. They're very poignant. They're pointed. We had some very biting satire on 2 different centuries, but still relevant even today, because some things, as we talked about earlier, are forever. So sort of challenges continue on and on and on. There's always a modest solution to be had. Alright guys, thank you very much for joining us. We will call it an early night here today. Our next reading will be on Friday night. We're going to be starting a new project, which will take more than a day this time, I promise. We've had a couple days of short stories to sort of fill the time and cut down on my backlog, and we've enjoyed them nonetheless, but I think it's time for something with a little bit more heft. So, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. If you haven't yet, please do drop a like on the stream. We are trying to grow our channel and grow our community, sort of spread the love of literature as best we can, and we'll the likes and the subscriptions help us kind of spread the word, and we will hopefully grow this together. Sort of get the love of reading out and about. Alright, have a great night everyone. Thank you again for joining us, and I wish you all a wonderful evening.